Okay. It was so quiet, I thought if I really went for it, it would upset that beautiful peace that's in the room. I didn't want to disturb it. So this morning I want to talk to you about breakfast with Jesus. Okay. Before I do that, I just want to share something that I hope will fit in with this, but it's not really about this. But can I have that picture up? Over the last 2-3 weeks, I've had the privilege, I may have shared, about going into Hemel School and doing some more RE lessons with youth across Hemel, which has been amazing. Richard has been leading some of the lessons. Another pastor, actually, Andrew, the pastor of Hemel Methodist Church, has been leading some lessons. And if you were at our life group recently, we talked in more detail about that, so I apologise if you were there and heard a little bit more. The lessons on the subject of Christianity through art. Okay. I've not got many artistic bones in my body, but I've learnt a lot through having to lead this lesson. And one of the pieces of artwork that we look at is this one here. Does anyone know anything about this piece of artwork? It's Jesus. Does anyone know who actually... He's knocking on the door. Zach, I showed Zach this painting actually before the service, and he knows a lot about it because actually he's seen it at school. Interesting. Actually, this is by William Holman Hunt, and I believe in 1904 it was put in place at St. Paul's Cathedral, where you can find this. And there's a beautiful moment in this lesson where we walk through 500 years, believe it or not, of Christian art. And right in the middle, this particular piece of art comes up. We look at the Lord's Supper. We look at this piece of art. And we look at some modern art. But it's great to talk about this picture and this picture of Christ. It's called the light of the world because you'll see his lamp there. But actually, if you look, he's knocking at a door. He's knocking. You know, to stand before some pupils and just share as a believer what this picture means is an awesome privilege, particularly for those who don't know Jesus and maybe have never heard his story before or know very little about the Christian faith. It's amazing what the power of one little seed has when it gets planted into your heart. I wonder whether there's a place, a picture, a moment in your life, even when you were a child, that was really impactful on you. It only was a moment, maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or an hour, but left a lasting impression on your life. In fact, now, if you close your eyes and think about that moment, you can visualize what was happening at that time. You can see a picture of that moment, and what it meant to you comes flooding back all of those years gone by. You know, God is incredibly clever in the way that he puts these tiny things into our lives that in that moment we think is insignificant, but later on it turns out to be something of great purpose and meaning and very special. Do pray for our last few lessons, by the way. It's just an amazing opportunity. Breakfast with Jesus. You remember, or you may not remember, last time I spoke, which was a few weeks ago, I took my shoes off. I don't know whether you were here. If you were here, I apologise for those. And I was talking about this whole scene where Jesus is washing the disciples' feet, and how Peter, when he came to Peter, Peter said, "No, there's no way you're going to wash my feet." And Jesus says, if I don't wash your feet, then you can't have any part of me. Our journey together has to end. Of course, at that moment, he's not talking about feet anymore. He's talking about the fact that Jesus is the only one that can wash us and cleanse us and allow us, permit us, enable us to walk with God. We've been singing about it this morning, and he says, Peter, if you won't have a part of that, then we can't go on together, because actually I am the only one who is able to bring you to God. A week or two after that, well, just finishing that, I was talking about the gap between the love that Jesus calls us to have for him. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. And talking about the fact that there is, if we are honest, always a gap between the love that God calls us to have for him and the love that we actually have. And it's important for us to recognise that. We have received the love of God, the agape love of God, but we don't yet love God to the level that he calls us to love him, or calls us to aspire to love him. And I've had these thoughts, particularly with regard to Peter, swirling around. I'm thinking about it. And then a few weeks after that, we landed at a church called Oasis Church in Collier's Wood in London, where we were doing a visit actually to talk about something else. We were going to talk about plan the next Harvest Alliance conference, which is going to be there in October, which is going to be amazing. But as part of that, we ended up in their sort of leaders stroke meeting at lunchtime, as part of that day. And Sam, who's the pastor there, started talking about Peter. And actually, he was talking about the restoration of Peter and thinking about the journey from Easter to Pentecost, and how as part of that journey, Peter, after he had denied Jesus 3 times, was also restored by Jesus. And he was talking about the conversation that Peter had with Jesus over breakfast. Breakfast with Jesus. So I want to just read a little bit of that conversation and then maybe just draw some thoughts out. I'm not going to read all of it, but the backstory is that actually Peter and some of the other disciples had been out fishing through the night, and they hadn't caught anything. And as they came back, they saw this figure on the beach. I don't think at that time they knew it was Jesus, but when Jesus spoke to them, they recognized that it was Jesus. And Jesus said, "Hey guys, why don't you cast your net over the other side of the boat?" This is in John 21. And so they haven't caught anything all night. These are pros, and they've not caught anything. They cast the net over the other side. 153 fish in the net. The net doesn't break. Miraculous. Amazing. But when Peter hears Jesus, he gets out of the boat, leaves the other guys to sort the fish out, and he runs to Jesus, and he finds that Jesus has already lit a fire. He's got some fish on there. He's preparing breakfast for them. And he says, bring a few extras. You must be hungry. Bring a few extra fish. They had 1 or 2, so they could spare a few more for the fire. And they had breakfast together on the beach. It's a beautiful thing. It says this, I'm going to read from the Amplified. So when they have finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? More than these others do, with total commitment and devotion. He says to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you with a deep personal affection, as for a close friend. So just to catch this here, the word that Jesus is using when he says, do you love me, is the word agape, which is the love of God, the selfless love that expects nothing back in return, which is divine. The word that Peter uses to reply is this word phileo, which is, I love you with a brotherly love, like the love that you would have for a deep friendship. Jesus says to him, feed my lambs. Again, he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Do you agape me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you, I phileo you, with a deep personal affection as for a close friend. Jesus said to him, shepherd my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? But this time, Jesus uses the same word for love as Peter had been using. Do you phileo me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you with a deep personal affection, as for a close friend. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. I assure you, and most solemnly say to you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and walked wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and arms, and someone else will dress you and carry you where you do not wish to go. Now he said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. Walk the same pathway of life that I have walked. You know, there's so much in this whole chapter, it's very difficult to keep to just one theme, but I'm going to try and do that. Breakfast is a great meal, isn't it? I mean, if you had a choice of your favourite meal, would it be breakfast? Would it be lunch? Or would it be dinner? These being three very British things that I hope most of you can understand. You know, in England, you know, we have breakfast, we have lunch, and we have dinner, maybe afternoon tea, about 4 o'clock for a cup of tea. You know, there was a time when I think I'd have said to you that dinner was my favourite, because there's such a variety of things that you can eat at dinner, and you can take your time. You can have a starter, maybe, nice main course, and you can even, if you're really pushing the boat out, you can have a pudding. I mean, in our house, most evenings, it's just literally not pudding. It's just the main course. I mean, you might be a 3-course household, I don't know. It takes time, certainly, but for those special events, you know, those special occasions, there's nothing more great than a special celebratory dinner, is there? You know, as I've got a little bit older, and I am slowly getting a little bit older, I'm not as young as May is, unfortunately, but I'm getting a little bit older. I've actually decided that breakfast is becoming more and more of a favourite thing for me. And there's nothing actually that I like more than having a long breakfast with friends, brunch thing. You know, you don't get up too early, sort of middle of the morning, and then you stretch it out right the way till lunchtime. That sort of brunch. A few coffees and tea, and you know, you can have incredible breakfasts here in the UK now. They do things which are beyond just the bacon, sausage, egg. You can have avocado, you can have smoked salmon. I mean, you can have pancakes and maple syrup and all sorts of things that some of you might think are terrible, but you can have really anything for breakfast. The Harvester, just in case you didn't know this, and I shouldn't advertise these things, there are many other great eating establishments, actually does steak. If you want steak for breakfast. I know that some of you are not on my page with this, but do you know, it's not just about the breakfast. It's not just about the breakfast. What about that moment, you know, when you're talking over the table? You've not got any rush. You know, when you've finished your breakfast, but the conversation is continuing and you're putting the world to rights. You know, at that time of the day, you're not feeling so tired as you are in the evening after your dinner and thinking, I'm falling asleep here. Maybe I'm showing my age. So after the breakfast, enough fish that the disciples could eat with a bit of bread probably thrown in. This sweet, precious time of fellowship with the resurrected Christ. The third occasion that he's appeared to his disciples, he has Simon Peter around the campfire. And the conversation is flowing. A few days earlier, Simon Peter had the worst moment of his life when he had denied that he was a disciple of Christ, a follower of Jesus. He didn't just do it once, but he did it 3 times. And the third time, as he did that, it says that the cockerel crowed. And that was significant because a few days earlier, Jesus had told him that he was going to deny knowing him. He was going to deny that he knew Christ. Jesus had said to him, listen, I'm going to have to die. I'm going to have to go to my death. And he said, there's no way that I'm going to allow that to happen. Over my dead body will I let that happen. And we see even in the garden as Jesus is being betrayed, Peter has got his sword out and he's taking the ear off the servant, and Jesus is saying, no, that isn't the way, as he heals this man and puts his ear back on. That would have been an amazing miracle to witness. Peter follows from a distance, and you know the story. So as he's eating breakfast and as the conversation is moving round to him, what is Peter thinking? What's Peter thinking? In the beginning, when Jesus meets Peter for the first time, it says that, this is in John 1, and to cut a long story short, Peter's brother and another disciple were with John the Baptist, and John the Baptist sees Jesus walking by and he says, that's the Lamb of God. The 2 disciples of John that were with him, one of them being Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, decide to follow Jesus. They leave John and they follow Jesus. They spend the afternoon with Jesus, and then Andrew comes home to find his brother called Simon and he says the first thing that Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. You know, the very first thing that Jesus said to Peter was this. He said, Jesus looked at him and said, You are Simon, that was his name at the time, son of John. You will be called Cephas, which is translated Peter. The first thing that Jesus does when he meets Simon is to say, I'm not going to call you Simon, I'm going to call you Peter, which means rock. Right at the very beginning. You see, if I was sitting round having breakfast with Jesus that morning, I'd be wondering what Jesus is going to say to me after I deserted him. I'd be thinking, you know what? I wonder whether Jesus is going to let me carry on being one of the crew. I wonder whether the next thing that he says at breakfast is, Peter, you know that you can't carry on. Because everyone knows that you let me down. That you disowned me in my moment of greatest need. In the moment that I needed my friends around me, you ran off. Maybe Peter was remembering that when he went off, it says that he went to a place, I don't know where that was, whether it was back to the upper room where they were having the Passover meal, or whether it was out back to the Garden of Gethsemane, but it says that he went away, and it says that Peter wept bitterly. It means that Peter wasn't there when Jesus was nailed to the cross. He didn't witness the events of the crucifixion in the way that others did. But I think at breakfast, Peter may have been reminded of the fact that the very first time that he met Jesus, he gave him a new name. There's this amazing moment in Matthew where Jesus is asking his disciples, who do people say that I am? And the disciples reply, some say you're John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And Jesus says, but what about you? Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you, Jesus, are the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. Doesn't call him Peter. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you, Peter, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. I wonder if over breakfast Peter was thinking about that. I may have blown it, but maybe God still has a plan for me. Maybe because I remember that he said that about me. He said that on this rock he would build his church. That sounds something significant. That sounds something important. I knew from the very beginning, I sensed that Jesus was the Messiah. I knew this. But, is God wrong about me? Because in the beginning he said that I would be Peter, I would be this rock that you're dependable, reliable, a firm foundation that you can build on. He said that he would establish something great through my life. I don't understand the full meaning of it, but I know that it was important. And I know that when he said, you are Peter, I knew that he was talking to me again and reaffirming what he'd said to me. How is it possible? Is it possible that after all of the events that have happened and all of my mess ups, and it seems like I've blown all of that, that it's still possible that God could do something in my life and through my life? And the beautiful thing is we then see this conversation over breakfast about love. Of all the things that he could have asked Peter, he didn't say to him, Peter, why did you deny me? He didn't say to him, Peter, what were you thinking? When you ran off. Because you said that you were going to be there for me. You said that you wouldn't let anyone. What happened? I said all these, or had all these great hopes for you, and like you, where have you been? What have you done? And I get the feeling that there's a bit of Peter in all of us. There's the Peter that hopes and thinks in his own mind that he can and will aspire to being faithful to God and living well for him. But actually the reality of life is that sometimes we mess up. Sometimes we fail God. And sometimes we wonder what it is and why it is that we are on this journey with God and we are called. He calls us his children. The great thing with Jesus is that he doesn't demand that Peter has the same level of love for him that he has for Peter. When we say, I want to love Jesus with all my heart, but that isn't yet a reality for me. Jesus is actually okay with that. Peter is saying, I love you as much as I possibly can. The way that I love you is like a deep, dear friend. I may not love you with that sacrificial, divine love that you have, which is beyond human love, but I do still love you in the best way that I possibly can. And Jesus doesn't say, that's not enough. In fact, the third time that he asks him, and you can imagine what the others were thinking around the fish and the bread and breakfast, thinking, is this really the conversation that we were expecting to have? Talking about love and all of this, they're listening in. Jesus says the third time, Peter, do you phileo me? He comes right down to his level. And he says, this love is enough. Even though in our weakest moment and in all of the chaos that sometimes ensues our life and all of the questions we have, saying, God, did you really call me back in the beginning? Did you really give me a new name? Did you really call me to be your son, to be your daughter, to have the closest possible fellowship with you? Jesus is just longing to hear those words, Lord, I love you. I still love you, despite everything that's happened. And he wants us to remember the words that he's spoken about us, because it's those words that have the power to release what it is he's going to do in our lives through us. So this name Peter is a boy's name in the Greek meaning rock. And Peter is derived from the Greek Petros, meaning rock or stone. The rock that Jesus was referring to about Peter was the rock of revelation. And the foundation of the church was going to be built on the continuing unfolding revelation of who Jesus Christ is And there is no power of hell that can overcome or stand against or resist the revealing of Jesus in all of his power and all of his splendor and all of his might. What we have to do is stay connected to his love and know that when the waters are rising around us, he is going to keep us. We just have to keep our eyes on him. And we also have to remember that despite our weaknesses and our failings and mistakes, God is bigger than all of those things. And he actually says that when we are weak and when we know that we have to be totally reliant on God's strength, that is the moment of trust. And so when we are trusting him like that, it says that his power is actually perfected in and through our lives. We know that Jesus restored Peter. 10 wasn't enough for him. Jesus could have said, all right, I'll just make do with 10. But you know, Jesus had a plan for Peter all the way along, just like he has a plan for you and for me. If we'll keep looking to Jesus and keep loving him as much as we can and asking him to help us grow in love for him. So I want to finish this morning by having breakfast with Jesus. What that means is that I want you to think about the breakfast that you want to share with Jesus if he was right here with you this morning. I don't know whether it's a full English or whether you want, what would you like to, that environment. I want you to just think about the breakfast that you would like to share with Jesus this morning. And then we're going to play some music and I'm going to pray and invite Jesus to come. In fact, I want to invite you to invite him to come to you to eat with you. That picture at the beginning of Jesus at the door is from Revelation 3, and it says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in and I'll eat with him." I'll eat with him. And Jesus is knocking this morning. You just have to open the door and let him come in and let him eat with you. And I believe that as you eat with him, there are some words that he wants to share with you. Just like he shared some words with Peter, there's some things that he wants to say to you. And if there is, just take note of those things. But can we just spend just a few minutes at the end of our service having breakfast with Jesus? Because he wants to come and eat with you and with me. So Father, just now as we finish, we thank you for this amazing picture. And we ask now, even as we're in this moment, that you would come and dine with us and eat with us. That we would know that closeness and that communion with you, that closeness with you here this morning. Yeah, we'll keep the music playing, and when you've finished breakfast, go and get yourself a cup of tea. Hopefully you can come this evening. If not, do think of us and pray for us. Thank you, guys.